Now, the next topic is consistency. What is consistency? The integral constants are maintained so that the database is consistent. Consistent means perfection before and after the transaction. So, the integrity constant, what we have seen in the unit 2, is that to be maintained by the database, which it should be perfect and before and after the transaction. The execution of the transaction will leave the database either its prior stable state or a new stable state. So, will the execution of the transaction, that is, the executing of the transaction, will make the database to be before the state or new state. The consistent property, the perfection property of the database state that every transaction sees a consistent database instance. So the instance is also to be perfect. Then only the database transaction will be in a perfection. The transaction is used to transform the database from one consistent state to another consistent state. For example, the total amount must be maintained before and after the transaction. Total before the T occurs is equal to 600 plus 300 is equal to 900. Total after T occurs is 500 plus 400 is equal to 900. So this is called the a sort of consistency in the amount basis. Therefore, the database is consistent in the case when T1 is completed by T2 false, then inconsistencies will occur. So T1 and T2 should be concurrent and should be perfection. Next is the isolation. Isolation shows that the data which is used at the time of execution of the transaction cannot be used by its second transaction until the first one is completed. Isolation shows the data to be used at the time of executing and transactions that cannot be used by the second transaction until the first transaction is complete. We have to go to the second transaction. So the first one is independent. After the first one is completed, it goes to the second one. So this is called isolation. Isolation, if the transaction T1 is being executed and using the data item X, then that data item cannot be accessed by any other transaction T2 until the transaction T1 is completed or end. The concurrent control subsystems of the database management system enforce the isolation property. Okay. The next one is the durability. The durability property is used to indicate the performance of the database consistent state. It states that the transaction made a permanent changes. So durability is the property used to indicate the performance of the database in a perfection state, that is consistent state. It states that the transaction made the permanent changes. They cannot be lost by the erroneous operation of the faulty transaction or the error transaction or by the system failure. When the transaction is completed, then the database reaches a state known as consistent state. This consistent state cannot be lost even in the event of the system is failure. The recovery subsystem of the database management system has responsibility over durability property.